Hi, friends, and welcome. I am your hot mess of a host, Mary Hendricks from The Very Merry Life, your new mom friend that soon will feel like an old friend. Twice a week, every week, I want you to come and join me as we cover moments in motherhood, marriage, sex, and more. Some moments worth savoring, others worth surviving, all with a laugh, pep talk, or F-bomb every now and again. I want you to come as you are, but leave the sugarcoating behind because, guys, we know how sweet it already is. So what do you say? Up for picking some daisies? Well, hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode. And hi, Whitney. Welcome.
Hey, thanks so much for having me here.
Yeah, I'm excited. So I got contacted from Whitney, Dr. Whitney. Say your last name for me because I was trying to pronounce Casares.
It's hard because my husband's family, they're Mexican. He's like a quarter Mexican. So when they immigrated here, they like changed the name to make it so that it sounded more anglicized. So, but it confuses every single person. So Casares.
Yeah. Casares. I like it. Isn't that such a shame? I hear it. My grandparents went through the same thing where because they're Lithuanian and when they came in, they were like, yeah, no, we're going to kind of Americanize this as best as possible to make it easy. And I even had a friend who I have a really, like one of my best friends, she's from Slovakia. And we were in conversation because I used to work when I graduated college, I used to work with a bunch of people and up in Martha's Vineyard, Massachusetts. And that's like a big vacation spot. And a bunch of Europeans usually come over to work. Yeah. And I worked with a bunch of Europeans and I found out like halfway through that their names weren't actually their names. It was names given to them by restaurants because they were easier to pronounce. So all of a sudden I'm with my best friend and I look at her, I'm like, is your name really this? And she's like, yes. She was like, why were you asking me that?
That's like, that happened on
and I was like, it's a legitimate question. I was like, because you wouldn't think of it. And I was like, because you get an American name, like you get like a run of the mill name just to make it easy. And I was like, I never thought to ask to make sure that this is like your legitimate name.
Yeah. But I mean, I think it goes to show honestly how much things have changed in the last 30, 50 years, but then also just in the last like 20 years. I mean, when it comes to names, but also what do we expect like from moms, what we expect in our households, all that stuff. It's crazy when you think about just like 2 generations ago, what was happening.
Oh yeah.
Scary.
Well, and I'm going to have you introduce yourself first and then we'll continue that conversation. So go ahead.
Yeah. So I'm Dr. Whitney. I'm a pediatrician by training and public health expert. So I have my public health degree from Berkeley and I became really interested in this connection between a mom's health and a kid's health when I had my first daughter who has autism, what people would have called Asperger's like back in the day, but now they just lump into kind of autism. And just motherhood wasn't what I expected. I really expected because I was a professional, because I told other people what to do every single day, that motherhood should be pretty easy for me. And honestly, I was kind of on my high horse if I'm being honest about what I thought about other moms when they came in. And then when I had my own daughter, I was like, oh shoot, this is way different than I thought it was going to be, which I think it's a lot of mom stories, but I just kept on muscling through for a long time. Like I kept on just being like, hey, I can do this. I am Stanford trained. I have this public health degree. I'm a pediatrician. I'm just going to keep reading all the books. I'm going to keep doing it all. And eventually that made everything worse for myself. Like I ended up being the one that snapped at everybody. I ended up being the one that was resentful at everyone. And so even though I was the one that was mad at everyone and I was the one who was kind of the martyr, it all came back to me. And I didn't want to feel that way anymore. So I decided to create this whole framework and now I do books and podcasts and a platform and a blog and speak and do all this stuff to really help moms understand that connection between their own wellness and their kids' wellness.
Yeah, I love that. And that's exactly why when you reached out to me, I was like, I love this, especially because hearing it from a pediatrician, like that is something, because like you said, this is someone that you go to school to learn about kids. You go to school to learn about babies. You do all of this stuff. And then when you step into it, you realize that it's a completely different ballgame. And that's like an argument that I'm always telling people, because being on social media and when you share the messy bits, when you share the hard bits, one of the biggest things that always comes back on me or to any mom I watch online is you knew what you were getting into. You signed up for this.
Yeah. And I don't think so. Yeah, I hear you. I I totally think so. That comes to me too. Like people are like, well, you didn't have to be a mom if you didn't want to. I mean, you know, like you didn't have to do it. But I think it's because we were all sold this lie about like you could lean into everything. I mean, like, thank God people like, you know, Sheryl Sandberg have now changed things around. Their whole organization is around like taking care of yourself. But that's not how it was in the beginning. Like in the beginning, it was very much about you should be able to be the master of all domains. And like, if you want to kill it in the world, what do you have to do? Basically just be a man. You have to act like a man. You can't be emotional, get your seat at the table, raise your hand, all this stuff. And the reality is like, we're not men. It is different. And I think that people kind of thought you could have it both ways. And I feel like that's totally the lie that I was sold.
Because I feel like, I know for me, like growing up when I watched, my mom was a stay-at-home mom. I think that's kind of what I always aspired to be. Sometimes I kind of beat myself up over that when I think back on like me growing up. And I've actually had this conversation before with I have a bi-monthly co-host who comes on, and I told her, I was like, when I even went to school, because I was sold this like, and not to say that it's not wonderful. Trust me. I like this related. I call it treading pudding because I'm like, it's a delicious spot to be in, but it's hard. And it's exhausting, but I think I didn't get to see the hard stuff. I feel like the generations, like our generations of parents, hid a lot of the really hard moments. And it was kind of you didn't admit weakness. Like their generation is like, if they messed up, tough cookies, it's not my fault. If something's wrong, it's not my fault, or we're not going to even let it show. I think that's my mom's a baby boomer, but I think that's like a boomer generation is like front, like they have a front on and they're good with that. And I think because of that, us now stepping into it, we're like, whoa, like what is this that we are in? And I did not know that this part existed, or being overstimulated, or mom rage, resentment, like any of that stuff. I was like, what's wrong with me? Like, what's wrong with me? And then you realize like, oh no, like they had it. They just were very good at hiding it. And
I think you're totally right. I think there was this front that people put on. I think they kind of had to if they wanted to get ahead, because they were, again, like moving maybe from being secretaries to try to be in the corner office. And so people were like, well, if you want this, again, like you better just like, you know, step up, be into it. The other thing I feel like, I don't know if your parents did this to you, but because I think this is a super common thing, not just on my parents, but like they were very much, if I was upset, like, oh, don't cry. Oh, don't worry. Oh, like, you know, you don't need to be sad. What can we do to like make it better? Like, okay, like let's like fix it. As opposed to, I think a lot of us as moms are figuring out sometimes there's nothing to fix. Like that's the thing with an autistic kid that I realized is you can't fix autism. Like you can support it. I can help her to feel better, but my daughter like still doesn't get the joke when my husband makes a joke and like pokes fun at her. She will go from 0 to 60 and be in a huge tears and having like a huge fit in 60 seconds because she misunderstood like the social cues. And that's something that we'll never get out of. And so I will constantly be dealing with that as a parent. And I think then this idea of like, don't cry or don't be sad, or like it happens to everyone, so it's not that big a deal. I think that just doesn't work for parents these days. So maybe that's part of it too, that we're living in this time where we're finally starting to be like, you know what I want to say? I don't even want to provide a solution. I just want to say it sucks. And I want someone to see me and know that it sucks with me, like be there with me and it's sucking.
Yeah, I think I think you're right on the head on that one, because it literally is. I think we've gotten away from one size fits all parenthood. And I think that's how it's always kind of been. And I think especially with like older generations, I don't get too much hate on social media, but when I do, it's usually actually men, funny enough. And that's usually when I touch on the marriage portion of how parenthood has affected marriage. It's usually always with men. And then with parent struggles, typically it's always older women. And again, it's like women my parents' age or grandmother's age or things like that, where I think they think it's my kids did this, so your kids need to do this. This is the solution, but they forget that your kids are not my kids and my kids aren't your kids.
Yeah.
And the way things were for you aren't the way things are for me. And it's not, it's very individual. It's an individual sport.
Yeah.
Like at the end of the day.
Yeah. I get the most hate when I talk about boundaries from the older generation, which I think is really interesting. Like especially if I talk about like grandparents, like being able to set some boundaries around what grandparents are able to weigh in on, or, you know, when it's okay for them to step in terms of parenting your own kids or the time. And I'll get people that will go back and forth with me. And I try, I'm sure just like you know, if someone like puts a comment, I'll engage for like a second and then I'm like, okay, not worth my time. Goodbye, you know?
No.
But people love to be, when you talk about boundaries with the older generation, to say like, well, those people, they did so much for you, so they deserve to like have full access to your kids and to do all this stuff. And I can't help but think, honestly, that comes from a place of, I'm postulating here, but if you didn't have any boundaries yourself, then it's really hard to see somebody else have boundaries in the next generation. I think that's true. You know what I mean? Like,
I think that, and I also think it's resentment. Yeah. I think it's a huge resentment because even, like, I don't struggle too much. My mom and dad are pretty good with like my parenting. I think my parenting is very in line with my parents.
Yeah.
At per se. So we've been good there, but my mother-in-law and we've always kind of hit little snags with like certain things. And it's hard with in-law stuff. It's hard because it's just, you got to maintain the relationship amongst everyone. So you're like trying to figure it all out. But I think for just like talking about for like a wide range of people in response that I've heard from that, I think it's resentment, especially with what a lot of us are dealing with too, with, you know, the village mentality. And when we talk about like the village is kind of missing and things like that. And a lot of the village is like we need our parents still. Like, I think we still need our parents and we still need stuff like that, our help. And I think what's I've seen from others is that parents are kind of saying, I already did it with you guys. I don't need to step up now. Totally. Like I put in my work and now it's your turn type of thing. And like, and it's kind of a passing the torch type of mentality where it's like, I'm not stepping up. I'm not helping you. I already gave my time and my effort. I'm wash my hands of this. Yeah. And I think that's hard I think they're pushing back on it, which I get. Like, trust me, I want to enjoy my golden years being old, but also I really want to be there for my kids.
We'll be back after a quick break. Eye-Opening Moments podcast are real-life stories of adversity, encounters, and perspectives. They are moments that can lift your spirits, give you some food for thought, or move you. For the introspective mind that likes to reflect, discover, and find solutions or meaning in a complex life, listen to Eye-Opening Moments podcasts.
Well, I mean, I think I'll speak from like my mom's vantage point. We've talked about this because my mom will help sometimes. She'll do little things, but I don't have my mom be the primary caregiver for my kids. One, because my daughter can be challenging. And so it's hard. She doesn't fit into kind of the old school parenting, framework as to how to deal with things. But two, my mom is like, you know, she wasn't a stay-at-home mom. She worked. So she's like, you know, it's not like I've just been being at home my entire life being a mom. I've also done the thing that you're doing, which is like working and trying to mom. She's like, so that makes me even more want my rest and to like just enjoy being with my grandkids and not now have another job because I'm in retirement. Just like a man would be in retirement, I want to be in retirement. And I'm like, you know what?
It's true. Yeah.
I get that. I totally get that. And
I totally get it too. It's so hard. I don't even know what the solution would be. I think it's because it's been years. I mean, think about it. I feel bad even just with you saying how much has changed in this much time. A show that I watch all the time, I love it, is called The Midwife. I don't know if you've ever watched it. Yeah. Oh my God.
I've seen that.
It's so crazy to watch it. And it's based off of memoirs of, you know, childbirth back in the late 50s, all throughout the 60s. And you watch it, and that's when my mom and dad were born. And I'm like, my poor grandmothers, like these poor women of just like what they had to deal with and the standards that were placed on them. And it's trickled down and we're still dealing with it where these standards are in place of how things should look and how things should be. And it is a lot when you're dealing with the mental load. I talk about mental load a lot. Like you deal with that you're dealing with that for all your life almost for the most part, but it's really heavy during these raising years, the rearing years. And you kind of, once you can put down some, you're like, I don't want to pick that up again. Are you kidding?
No, I mean, actually I loved, okay. So my favorite one that you did, which I totally did then a, copy of, was you in the car and you're like, what people think I am, like, as I'm driving down the road. And it's like, hey, hi. And he's like, like move. Like, I think some of that rage and some of that resentment, it is the mental load. It is all these heavy kind of expectations that are on us. And I guess what I would say to moms, and the thing that I've learned is that not everything has equal weight. So I think that in generations past, like a clean kitchen and a perfect meal and looking perfect and showing up at the bake sale and being like Betty Crocker to your neighbors and hosting parties and all this junk, like that worked kind of, sort of, maybe because that's like what you did. But now with all this stuff, it's like you can't carry all these balls and have them all weigh exactly the same. And so one of my hugest things to moms is figuring out what are the things for you, like for you as an individual person, what are like the top 5 things that you want to be your top priorities in your life? Like, what are the things that you care the most about? You're going to put 100% effort into these things. When they come up, if someone asks, it's going to be a yes, always.
Yeah.
And then you can start to kind of like deal with all the other shit, honestly, that comes up for us that doesn't really matter, but it's an obligation from society, or it doesn't really matter and someone else could be doing it for us, or it doesn't really matter and we just need to be like, I'll do that, but I only have 10 minutes for it, to stop us feeling like we have to do it all and have, because I think it is for women. I know for me, I don't know for you, Mary, but like for me, it's the thinking about it that's just as much as the doing it. So like mental load. Yeah, it's like the ruminating. It's the in the shower. I'm like, oh God, that dentist appointment.
Yeah.
Okay, I gotta do this for the kids. But so when things aren't as important, you can be like, I'm not even paying attention to that right now because it doesn't matter. It's not on my plate.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's hard. It's what was I gonna say? Because you just love when your brain just shuts off while you're thinking.
My favorite thing.
What is that? Is there a science reason for that? I've like literally just thought about that. And I had someone, I love how I'm just like completely going on a different tangent.
You're good.
This is what I do. I follow someone and she just said, my brain works in mysterious ways that I can remember every little failure, every little thing that I can guilt myself over for the entire day, but I will forget why I walked into a room or what I was saying mid-sentence. And I'm like, that is me right now. But I know you were just saying mental load. It is tremendous. It's tremendous. And I think what's hard is that we get it's the non-negotiables. Like I always think about like the non-negotiables for yourself. And I think a lot of it also gets placed in like a aesthetic view too. Like I'm actually just about to put up a video. I just was editing it before you came on where someone on yesterday's reel I posted up, I said what the mom I thought I would be at school drop off, like calm and collected. And then what I really am, and just me losing my absolute mind, yelling at everyone to get the hell in the car. Right. And someone commented saying, thank you for this. I thought for a moment there I was the only one that doesn't have it all together. And I just filmed. I literally just grabbed my phone. I look like hell right now because it's just been one of those days. And I was like, you know what? I was going to kind of put myself together to respond to this, but I was like, screw that. You're just going to see everything. And I just went through my house where it's like an epic cluster F. Yeah. And I was like, some days it's like that. Other days it's not. It's just depending. But I know right now, the moment I hit post, I will probably get some comment from someone who will see just that little snippet and forget that I am probably carrying 10,000 other things that I am doing. And God forbid, the lower on the totem pole is my house and the appearance of how it looks. But yet we grade that parent at that moment off of that one small thing, and we forget that there's like 10,000 other things that they're doing really well at. And it's a battle. It's a constant battle.
Yeah. Okay. So I will say this like little window into pediatrician world. Like,
yeah.
So I love all the people that I work with. I think they're amazing. And it's really interesting coming at it from the lens of having a special needs kid, because you're right. There are some times where I'm totally put together. There are some times where I am like out in public, so loving and like great to my kids. And there's sometimes where I am just at my freaking edge and I'm trying not to lose it. And just like you said, there's like snippets, especially actually school drop off is like my least favorite time of the entire day. So like, I've actually one trick, if you live close enough to your kids' school and your kids are old enough to ride a bike, I have gotten my kids to start riding their bikes to school.
That's great. Yeah,
we live like 3 blocks. But the thing that it does is like, once we're out the door, they're like so focused.
Yeah.
And so now I've cut out the actual like, hurry it up, keep on walking, don't get distracted, don't talk to your friends, stop hitting your sister. And instead now we're just like, they go in their own little thing. So anyway, bikes are like the way to go if you can. But what was it? Okay. So, but in Portland, in my office, before I had a special needs kid, I would be like the other pediatricians, like I think physicians are, and all people who are in caretaker professions. People come in and they'd be with their kids, and you'd be like, every once in a while, not all the time, but like a little bit judgy, right? Like they'd come and they'd act a certain way with their kids, or they'd yell at their kids, or they'd like say something kind of rude, and you'd be like, oh my God, like, ugh, that mom, wow, Jesus, doesn't have it together. Or they'd look a mess,
Yeah.
And then once I had my own kid, I noticed that so much more of what like professional people did who weren't in the same, maybe like life stage I was with my kids, who maybe had like a parent at home who wasn't working as well, who just had extra help or grandparents helping. And I was like, wow, we judge each other so much by small glimpses. I think it's because of Instagram and Pinterest and all of that, right?
Oh,
like,
it totally is. It totally is. So. There's no winning. My big thing, and I kind of like really honed in on it, is like, I am a very common thread type of mentality. Like I literally focus on that. And I think because I've done that, it's actually been incredibly validating for myself. Someone the other day actually gave me a really great question in my DMs. And I think it was, I forget what happened. I think my youngest, she's managed to get her diaper off. She's 18 months old. I don't know if that's too little for potty training, but she's been showing many signs of like getting the diaper off.
When they're the youngest kids, sometimes they're watching everybody else.
Yeah. But she went in the other room. I thought she was watching Miss Rachel and making her mac and cheese or something. And I all of a sudden hear her crying, and I walk over and she got her diaper off and she pooped on the floor and she stepped in it, and she obviously didn't like that on her foot.
Right.
And so she was screaming and walking around the carpet. So now it's everywhere. And I just look and I was like, oh my God. And I didn't freak out. I actually was like calm and collected. I was surprised that I was that calm and collected. Because it depends on the day, honestly.
Yeah, totally.
And I had shared about it online, and someone had said, do you think it's because of being online that your reaction was what it was? Like, do you think it's because of an accountability type of thing of knowing that you're getting online and others are watching? And I said, yes and no. I said, because on the other end, if it was a really crappy day on social media, because we've all had them where people are just absolutely mean for no reason, it can actually do the opposite for me. Where I know when my husband knows, like my husband can even tell when something has been not so nice to me online, because he will get home and he'll be like, what happened today? And I hate that. I hate when that happens. But I said, on the flip side, what I think it's done is that I have been validated so much because I've shared authentically and I've shared openly and honestly that I've been talked to in a way, and I've talked to others in a way that I have to transfer onto myself, because we are so kind to one another that we like, you wouldn't talk to your mom friend the way you probably talk to yourself, but you do. Yeah. And I think I've just gotten good at like reminding myself, like, this is okay. Like this is okay, because I would say that to another mom. And
Yeah.
I think that's like the one thing we forget.
Totally. No, that's a huge piece of self-compassion, that like mindful self-compassion where, we're so good at being kind to other people. We're so good at being like gentle and forgiving, but to ourselves, we're so cruel. I mean, it happens all the time. The other cool part of self-compassion that I learned about a couple years ago was this idea of like fierce self-compassion, which is like getting like fired up on behalf of yourself for the messages that have been sent to you or like because of the way you've been conditioned. So I did a whole podcast episode that was about body image, and it was talking about how like, God, I'm so angry that like there's this like skinny white female like look that I'm supposed to have. And that like, I feel bad about myself because I'm not always exactly that. And like, it's rooted honestly in like racism. You know what I mean? Like, this is like so messed up. I'm so mad. But like, I and part of that is like having compassion for yourself around like, it's not my fault I feel this way. It's because like someone else has placed this on me. Society has placed this on me. And so I can be kinder to myself.
Well, especially with the body portion of that. I actually, as a side note, because of the body portion, I covered it a little while ago. Which I should be curious as a pediatrician, what your thoughts are on it. I had my daughter. So my kids are always 99th percentile. So they've always been since the day they were born, my girls, my boys, and they've been very consistent with their growth pattern. Yeah. And because of that, they've always looked older than they are. So my oldest is 5.5, but she looks like she could be 8. And whatever. And so my husband brought her and my son to the pool, and 2 little girls were at the pool who I'm guessing are like 7 and 9, 8 and 10, somewhere in that realm. And the youngest of the 2 sisters was playing with my daughter, and the older sister, I guess, came over because she was mad that her sister was no longer playing with her, and came up to my daughter and asked my daughter how much she weighs. And started having conversations like that. And my husband heard it and called my daughter over and was like, we're just going to get on out of here. And I didn't really address it because my daughter is thankfully young enough to be like, I don't really know what that means. And there's nothing to be had there. But I was like, this is such a tough thing because you realize you're so careful at home. And then you realize that like others, but like, I don't know if it's, I know with pediatrician office, and the one tidbit that I've offered is I've asked my pediatrician not to talk about that in front of my kids, which I'm sure all pediatricians would accept. Like I told her, like, if it's a problem, come to me personally, but don't say it in front of my kid.
No, it's a huge shift that we're having. And you know, what's interesting is, so part of my role is I'm an American Academy of Pediatrics spokesperson. And so, I get all the like policy stuff. Like I get some of that stuff like first, before it goes out. And I saw the AP policy on obesity and like all these new recommendations they've put out on pediatricians, like getting more intentional, I guess is the right word, about really addressing obesity early on. And they got a lot of flack for it. Like, of course they did. Parents are like, yes, I want to know, like, health concerns. Of course, I want to make sure my kid's okay. And also we have to be so careful about the way that we talk to our kids. Absolutely. I mean, my daughter who's almost 10 will be like, I don't like this part of my belly. It's like, too big. And then there's this weird thing that happens in your head, I think, as a mom who also like continues. I think all of us like struggle with what do I look like? How am I? How do I show up? What's my body size? Right. And so you have that conversation happening in your head. And then in the other side, you have this like real intentionality around trying to make sure that your kids don't carry that torch on. Yeah. So these conversations can get so weighty, so young. Honestly, my biggest tip is to talk to kids. This is what I do, to talk to kids about wanting to make sure that we have enough energy to do all the things we want to do. Talking to them about making sure that we sleep well, making sure that we like don't have aches and pains in our joints, that our hearts work well, that our lungs work well, that like generally
that our bones
speaking,
are nice and strong. Yeah,
exactly.
Like that. We break it down as like an anatomy type of thing.
Like we want to do things for our body that will make sure that it can run in the best way possible. So does that look like eating fries at every single meal? No, you know what I mean? Like that doesn't have all the nutrients that my kids need. Does that look like eating milkshakes? So I definitely would talk with my kids about like, you had a milkshake yesterday. And so like today we're not doing a milkshake because you already had some of that food. We need some of these other nutrients to balance it out. So that's my tip, is to talk about exercise and
Is
activity.
BMI still being covered? Is BMI still being covered?
BMI is still being covered.
BMI.
I know.
I hate
We
BMI.
need a new metric, honestly.
Yeah, because I was always outside of it. I know BMI messed my head up. I struggled with disorder. I call it disordered eating because there's not been one clear-cut thing that I've stuck to, but I've tried it all. But I've always struggled with it, and that's why it's such like a I talk about it a lot because it's like
it's a hot topic.
It's a hot topic, and it's a fear of my kids because with my kids, I am 5'2" and I'm petite. My husband is 6'4" and 220 pounds. My kids take after my husband, and they're most likely going to be taller than me. They're most likely going to have different bodies than mine. Like, that's okay. That's awesome.
Right.
I just want to know that I am like so prepared for those tough conversations because I'm like, it's impacted me so tremendously where I'm like, it scares me. Like,
no, me too. I think a huge part, again, like, I guess coming back to this thing about generations, right? Like, I think the generation behind us would have been like, oh, well, I can't dig deep into like, what are my issues as I'm trying to address what's happening with my kid because I just need to put on a brave face. To me, I am working so intensely with my therapist on like, hey, this is the feeling that came up for me when I saw my daughter at this exact same age that my mom said to me, like, you need to start running. You know what I mean? At like the age of like 9. Like, bless my mom, but like, you know,
I had a child. She's a psychologist, but she came on, but she works with families to discover like about food, like the psychology into food. So she works with families on creating that. But we've talked about that. And she's like, our generations of our moms did the best that they could with what they were done. Same thing with my mom. My mom, because of puberty, when I went through puberty, girls put on more weight. Typically girls put on weight. And that's just a thing. And I think it freaked my mom out a little bit that I did when you start getting boobs and things like that. And you start having hips and all that. And she introduced me to Weight Watchers. And I knew how many points were in an Oreo when I was like 11. I was just like, I know. But it wasn't like a bad thing. She wouldn't make it known. She was just like, this is what we're going to eat. Like, this is it. Like Slim Fast shakes. You saw it like firsthand with them. Like it was the norm. It's what they knew. And then I think of my grandma who same thing. My grandma used to tell my mom, she would sit on the phone with, whatever and be in like a door frame and knock her hip on a door frame because the rumor was that if you did that, it would shrink your hips. So she just knock it on the door frame. So that's like what it's just.
We're so wild. Fucked up. It's really interesting. I mean, it's like really interesting. I mean, so I think my biggest thing for moms probably as you're preparing to have these conversations, like biggest piece of advice would be to like get real with yourself about how you feel, about how you talk to yourself, about like, what are the messages you received at these exact ages? So that then as you're like filtering through and you're hearing your kid say this thing that you thought in your own mind too, at that same age, then you can answer back with something that's actually helpful versus something that's going to be hurtful long-term, to me, it's all about like reckoning a little bit of like self-compassion about how you were treated and then having a plan with your kids that helps to move the needle like even a little bit.
I just saw a great quote yesterday and I follow a page and they put it up and it was so good because I think it was made more for people who are having issues with their mothers or things like that. But I put it back on myself and it said something, I'm going to paraphrase where it said, just because your mom didn't break all generational curses doesn't mean she didn't break any. And I was like, I love that. And someone in the comments, because then you go to the comments and read all that. And someone said, your glass ceiling is your children's stepping stone and stepping block. And I was like, I love that because all of us are going to hit it. All of us. Like there's only so much that I can do. And there's still things that I have to learn and you have to learn and every parent has to learn within the time that we have here. Yeah. And we're not going to be able to do it all. And I think especially in this day and age, we get so beat up. We beat ourselves up so tremendously over that fact and over that want to break every terrible thing that we feel happened to us. And we can't. Like there's no way that we can do it all.
Yeah, I think maybe like you hit the nail on the head in terms of like what the crux of my new book is and also on like what I think is the solution. I mean, I think I so appreciate all of the people who are like ardently working toward work gender like bias, like getting rid of that, you know, any type of like discrimination kind of in the household where moms are having like all of the mental load, you know, us being able to have like the free time that we need and loving ourselves and loving our bodies and like all of those things. But I think sometimes these people who are so well-intentioned, it's like, if it doesn't get solved today, then now you are a failure. You're a failure in your own home if you haven't created perfect equity. You're a failure at work if you don't have a culture at your work where it's perfectly supportive of you. You're a failure if you can't figure it out in terms of like even figuring out a plan to figure out what are your priorities or whatever. And to me, it's about like Rome was not built in a day. It's gonna be maybe, like you said, I break a few generational traumas. I break some generational curses for my kids, and then they move on to break even more. And like, maybe it's just about awareness.
Yeah.
Like picking a few things that I want to be aware of as much as possible instead of trying to solve the entire world in one day.
Yeah. It's the prioritization. Like you were saying, we all carry different non-negotiables. Like, what are our non-negotiables with focusing with our kids as to certain things? And I've talked to plenty of moms where some of them are like spanking, getting rid of like the spanking. And some of them have been very good, but even like and I talked to some moms who, you know, spanking is a big thing. And I think it's a big thing with past generations where some moms have done it and they were like, I failed. And I was like, well, have you done it since, or do you do it every, and they're like, and I remind them, I'm like, did your parents spank you after every, like, there's some parents that would spank the crap out of you after every terrible situation. Yep. And if you have one slip, and I know that it's awful. Yeah. Trust me, I've been there. Yeah. But I said, when you do that, I was like, you already did something way different than what your parents did. And you're making strides with that. And I was like, and it's not going to be perfect. And that's just that's the big example. Cause I think that's such I know for my generation with like, you know, and our generation of talking to parents, I think that's one of the biggest cycles that we're trying to break is like spanking. Spanking sucks. God, it's awful.
No, but you're right. Take that from a pediatrician 100%. Like, we've done a 180. Like, it makes sense. We're going to have a little bit of struggle there. There's going to be a little bit of a transition. We've done a 180 on women doing everything in the house and men doing nothing in the house. It's going to be a transition. Like, why are we imagining that things are going to change overnight? Like, that's just wishful thinking, honestly. You know, it's wishful thinking. So
it makes me excited. It makes me excited for like seeing our kids and what comes out of that. That's like, you know, I know with your content and my content, I think I've always said it before, like I've created my content for my kids with my kids in mind and hoping that I hope my content is no longer needed. Like I hope one day my content is, I have nothing to talk about. Like I hope that. And I think that's why it's very uncomfortable for some generations when we talk about, you know, getting hate from older generations is because it's rocky. Right now we're generation like rough patch. Like we are just the ones that are trying to figure it out and verbalizing that. And that's it's change is like starting to come, but change doesn't come from ease. Like it's hard to put change into effect. And we're seeing it tangibly at this very moment. So it makes me excited to see what kids of the future as parents are going to be like.
Totally.
Yeah. Awesome. So tell me about your book and then we'll wrap things up because this is awesome.
So the book is called Doing It All, Stop Overfunctioning and Become the Mom and Person You're Meant to Be. And really overfunctioning is the main word. The main word is you're doing everything and what's it doing for you? You know, like when people tell me I'm so busy and I'm like, doing what exactly? Like, I get it. I have a lot of stuff that I do. I'm busy, but like, busy and exhausted. Like when you say it, you say I'm busy, but then you're like, I'm so busy. Ugh. Like that's terrible. Speaking of examples for kids and what we want for our kids, what I don't want for my kids is for them to get to the end of their lives and be like, well, that sucked. I did everything for everybody else. I was a constant martyr. I hated my job. I hated my kids. I hated my life. And so I know, just like we were talking about body image, that part of what I'm doing for my kids is trying to model what I want them to experience as well. So that's a huge like motivator for me, is thinking about the next generation and thinking about what would I expect for them. So this book lays out a framework for doing that. It lays out a framework for prioritizing the things you care the most about. It lays out strategies for dealing with all the stuff that you don't care about really, but that has to get done. And then probably most importantly, it lays out really some solutions and some key areas of focus that are about getting to know yourself well enough for you to be able to prioritize. So, and what I mean is not like kumbaya circles. What I mean is what we were just talking about, like self-compassion, leaning into radical acceptance, the idea that things sometimes don't change, my autistic daughter, understanding what are the cultural things that have happened that make us feel the way that we feel, so that we realize that it's not all our fault. So that's the book. It's called Doing It All. It's out January 23rd, 2024. Great. Yep. And then we have a really cool pre-order promotion that's going on. When people pre-order by October 1st, they can actually be eligible to win $15,000 in free childcare. Because as we were talking about with kind of like, what are the things people are supposed to do when they don't have, maybe elderly people in their family that can help, or where's this village that we all were promised? We know there's a childcare crisis at hand. And so the publisher and I really wanted to put our money where our mouth was and provide some real solutions.
That's amazing. That's freaking awesome. That's a big portion of it. The childcare crisis right now is absolutely absurd. It's hard. That's another thing. I literally just talked to another parent yesterday, and I was just saying, it's hard because we judge others from like a glimpse. And I said, we forget that there's like so many other portions of our lives that we can't even compare. Like there are some things where, I think older generations didn't have to deal with the cost of daycare and childcare and everything, it's just nutty. It's absolutely nuts. So I appreciate you being on, and for everyone listening, I'm going to link everything of Whitney's in the show notes. If you want to pre-order, I'm going to talk to you because I'm going to air this. We'll air this before October 1st. I'll move around schedules. That way we can get people up. But if you guys are listening, go enter. I mean, go pre-order and go enter to get help and also help yourself with the book once it comes out. So this is amazing. So thank you so much for this conversation, because I think this is going to help so many people.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure to be here.
Another episode down. Thank you all so much for listening. If you loved today's episode, I would be so appreciative if you would leave a rating and review. I cannot begin to tell you how much those mean to me, but also how much they help me get in front of more eyes and more ears. As always, be sure to check back every Tuesday and Friday for a new episode, whether it's an episode with me and my husband, me and Katie, or just another incredible, amazing guest. Stay tuned for more honest, real, raw chit-chat. And hey, do me a favor before you go. Remind yourself how amazing you are, how enough you are, how special you are. And boy, oh boy, I sure am glad to have you here. Thanks, friend.